Boom. Okay, we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another wonderful episode of Vagabond Dog Industry Chats. This week, we have Phil Tibitoski from Young Horses, creators of Octodad, Octodad Deadliest Catch, and as we played through this week, Bugsnax. How you doing, dude?
I'm good. How are you?
I am
It's nice to hear from you.
nice to hear from you as well. As we were talking before the show, I think the last time we bumped into each other, it must have been like minimum 4 years ago, possibly up
Yeah,
to six or seven. Um, Back when Octodad was still a very fresh project. You guys were launching just as we were starting our game dev careers. And actually, our first interactions kind of came about when I was a games journalist freelancing for a lot of people, and I wrote some pieces theorizing quite heavily about the true nature and meaning of Octodad that
yeah.
we don't have to dive
I
into.
really enjoy making those types of games, like making games where people get to theorize and
Mhm.
interpret, as opposed to like this is exactly what it's about, uh, sort of thing.
I mean, I Bugsnax is definitely kind of one of those games.
Yeah,
Like unquestionably, there are ideas of like what does this mean
right.
has came to me while playing. But I mean, I don't want to impose too much of that on you or on
Sure.
anybody watching or the player or in the audience.
I I feel like I have different levels of my own like intent having worked on it. Of like, there's a kind of vague or overarching, like, I don't know if it's like humanitarian, but like message slash moral system, and then that kind of can come down to a more micro level of like very specific, I don't know how to say it, like events. So it's more
Mhm.
like, um I don't know if we want to hop right in, but
We're already there.
the we're already there. The overall thing that I think about when I think about the game is people contending with different problems in their lives, uh, in different ways that are often the kind of like quick and easy solution initially, or that's what they believe. And it turns out that like those often only turn out like poor, poor like consequences and outcomes, because of the fact that they were kind of easy to get to, or at least,
Right.
um, I don't know, maybe the most harebrained or something like that, rather than kind of, I think the oftentimes with the stories in Bugsnax, it's about like reaching out for help and being honest with yourself, and like looking to community for support and stuff like that. So there's like that like macro, overarching level, but then there are the kind of like various micro interpretations of whether it is like environmentalism or addiction or, um, you know, relationships and emotional abuse and things like that. It's kind of all over. Um, and I feel like both with Octodad and with Bugsnax, that's like what we are good at is not like the mechanics are good and I enjoy playing the game and it's fun, but I think the world building and the how relatable the characters and the stories are, and how often they can be interpreted to fit anybody who plays the game, where they can kind of relate and get something out of it, is what we do the best.
Yeah, because I mean, you definitely have like on the macro level, you have this like I guess magical entity that is the bug snacks, and then you have all of these very varied and complex characters that you can look at this magical ball through their lens, and I guess that gives you the opportunity to um, recontextualize this sort of magical element or whatever into these different aspects, and it works really really well. And I want to ask a bit about, I guess, like since we're on the topic, like the writing process for that. especially writing an ensemble cast. It's something that I had to do through the last 5 years,
Yeah.
and the tricks and the stuff that comes through it. How did you guys approach um, coming up with that cast of characters and then developing the different angles by which players would, or the different avenues Bugsnax as a concept would be explored?
I can talk about it in a structural way, but Kevin Zune,
Yeah.
they're the lead writer on the game, and they wrote alongside Sage Coffee, who also helped a lot with a lot of the characters and their interactions and their overall plot. And then we also had Alexa Ray Correa and a couple other people help out with the story editing, Cat Grime, and then like John Murphy on our team, and then multiple people on our team. But basically, Kevin would often go through, write a draft of different story beats, or the characters or their backgrounds, and they're like kind of you flesh out a backstory for each of them, whether the player knows about it or not, because it helps you base decisions they might make in the game and kind of lead their character through the story that you're trying to construct. And so each of our characters, each of the Grumpuses, have those sorts of backgrounds and backstories from, well, what were they like on the kind of like mainland in New Grump City? What you know, what kind of Grumpuses were they? What kind of lives did they lead? What kind of jobs did they have? What were the problems that led them to wanting to leave and go to Snacktooth Island? And some of those things are explored more than others in the game itself through like their interviews and their side quests and stuff like that. But the whole writing process took a really long time, and I don't think it was something that was ever really done until it was like, okay, we have to record these and we have to get it through localization, and know exactly what's there to do ratings and all the like necessary logistical stuff to release a game. um, but so Kevin would kind of write those drafts. He'd bring them to the team. We might talk about them after having read over them. And after a few iterations, we would then go to a team table read where each person would take a character and kind of try to play that character in the scenes, to see if the language felt, natural, if it felt like it fit each of those characters and their archetypes. And I think there's a purposeful move to base each character around an archetype, but then kind of go from that and flesh them out and make basically players think when they first encounter this person or this Grumpus, oh well, this is what type of character this is, and this is probably all I'll kind of get from them. This is all the flavor I will get from them. But we went out of our way to make sure that they were fully fleshed out, people that you could kind of understand, relate to, and you might expect something from them and then get something completely different, or might hate them initially but grow to love them, that sort of thing, or vice versa. And it was just a very long process where it's like we probably went through more than 10 team table reads of various scenes multiple times. We reached out to a couple different sets of voice actors to get like test table reads before we had even cast characters, and just to see like, is this working? Do these characters feel real to one another? That sort of stuff. And we knew from the beginning that we wanted it to be a fully voiced game, because we thought and think that like those voices lend themselves like a ton to making it feel like a a live world with real furry Muppet people in it, as opposed to where if it was like Simlish or some sort of like game made up game
Right.
language, it might be cute and funny, but I don't know if people would relate to them as much as they seem to,
Right.
since it's come out.
Yeah, it's
So
also a big accessibility thing in terms of like just keeping the player comfortable
right,
and like, I mean, at the end of the day, reading is work,
yeah,
and no matter how well it's written.
that's
I
definitely something we were thinking about too. um, is the fact that we want our games to be as accessible as we're able to make them, and part of that is thinking about the age of the audience who's playing and how quickly can they read and
Right.
understand and comprehend what's going on. And I think for like younger kids, like if they're like 7, 8, maybe they can't read that fast, or maybe they just need a little bit of help on like pronunciation of things like that. And I think voices go a long way. I know that I learned, like growing up, I learned a lot of different words and meaning behind things, and like structures through playing games and
Right.
reading.
I mean, well, the youthfulness aspect is something I actually did want to touch on. Like,
Yeah.
was it always intended to be in this, like, I mean, it definitely has appeal for adults,
Mhm.
but I mean, it is something that I can absolutely see a 12-year-old like falling in love with and like really living in that space in their head for an uncomfortably long time.
Right.
The way a lot of media properties tend to grab them. Like, was that the intention?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of our inspirations and the general kind of like age group of the team, most of us grew up around the like 90s Nickelodeon, or like even Cartoon Network kind of eras where I feel like they still hadn't gotten a handle on a lot of cartoons where they presented a lot of adult themes in ways that maybe kids didn't fully understand, um, but maybe got the gist of, and parents weren't often doing the kind of research into knowing
Right.
what their kids are actually watching. But it's more like, I guess, that we believe that like kids are smart enough to kind of absorb these themes, and even if they don't get all of the details, like understand the sentiment, because all the things that we loved didn't treat us like kids. A lot of the entertainment that we enjoy even now, I mean, we've drawn inspiration from things like Adventure Time and Over the Garden Wall, and Steven Universe and things like that, where yeah, it's a show made for kids, but also there's a lot of heart to it, uh, and it's not a kind of cheap. I don't know about cheap, but like there are some shows that are made for younger audiences that are like, here's a bunch of colors and movement, enjoy, and that's
Right.
kind of it. And maybe you're learning some like how to count, things like that if you're an even younger audience, but there's not necessarily a lot of moral value or um,
Things to think about, or yeah.
yeah,
um,
there's nothing to ponder. There's nothing to love and care about as much. And I feel like a lot of the shows that don't do that drop away pretty quick. But then if you see other stuff, you have like lifelong fans of some of these shows because they love the characters and they love the worlds, and there's stuff to, like you're saying, ponder.
you guys worked on this for like 6 years, about.
Hmm.
I want to
Yeah.
know what it's like to stay in that youthful vibe for that long. You know, like
Right.
I have only ever written, this is an M-rated game, no question. Like, and not even for the blood or violence or sex. I mean, but the content. What's it like to make a game for so long and keep that youthfulness in mind?
I mean, I think it lines up well with our humor in general, anyways, and our teams just like makeup. Uh, it didn't feel very difficult. I mean, there was definitely a lot of times where we had to be very cognizant of who we were making the game for and make sure that that tone was fairly consistent. I guess in terms of the boundaries on both the like younger kid end and the higher like older kid teen end, I guess. Um, but we've always thought of ourselves not necessarily as making things to the quality of a Pixar or something like that, or an Adventure Time necessarily, but just, I guess, hitting the same tone of the accessibility of like a kid could be watching this and find a lot of things to enjoy about it, whether it's the slapstick, the physical humor, uh, the like straight up poop jokes, or like an adult could be watching and playing this and enjoy this whole other section of content and be understanding the same stuff but on a different level, and getting some value out of that. Because I like with Octodad, I think that was, at least initially with the student version of the very first Octodad, it was an unintentional result of like realizing like, hey, these young kids really love this and older people also love this, and we liked that, and so we ran with it with Dad Leaves Catch and pulled it over into Bugsnax as well, just because it's a very fun space to be in, where you can kind of play with expectations a lot, where people are like, oh well, this looks like a fun, uh, bright and sunny kids
Right.
game, but also we can go places and
Yeah.
surprise people.
And it makes me want to smash my controller sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes that's pretty much, yeah, that's pretty much required for our games, I think, at this point.
um, is there anything that you found super difficult about keeping that in mind, or is this just like a completely natural process because of the makeup and who you guys are?
For the most part, I think it felt very natural. I don't think it was that difficult, um, because like while I'll go watch, like this reference is even dated. While I'll go watch like Breaking Bad or something
Right.
and enjoy that, I also still watch anime that's made for like 12, 13 year olds. I also, still love things like Adventure Time. Uh, and so it doesn't feel weird to exist in that space. And I think that's pretty true for most of the team, if not all of the team. They're kind of in that same headspace where it's like we never felt like enough shame to stop enjoying that like younger audience
Right.
stuff, as long as it's substantial, as long as it doesn't treat you like a kid, it's often a lot of fun. So
No, that's really cool. That's really really cool. It means that the game has come from the heart, in a
yeah,
very very real
it's
way.
100% us for sure. We didn't have to put on, I mean, like in the characters and stuff, like, uh there's obviously stuff where it's like, well, we should talk to someone who is like this and ask them what their life is like, and
Right.
stuff like that. But in terms of just the overall tone of the game, yeah, it just came from who we are.
Now, in terms of how the game was developed and put together, in contrast to Octodad, as far as I understand, you guys went through a couple design pitches through the team, and Bugsnax was the one that kind of you landed on, and then the project evolved from there. Versus Octodad was you guys kind of came together during school, and the project sort of like manifested itself. Um,
We actually, Octodad had a similar process.
okay,
There were more people because that original Octodad team was about 18 people, and everyone did their like one page pitches of big vague ideas for games, whether it be mechanics or like an art style or a story or whatever. And then everybody on the team voted, brought them down to eventually like three prototypes, kind of from whoever. It didn't matter what discipline you're in, but if it's your idea, now you're good job, you're the creative director. And like, going from there into prototyping and stuff, and then picking from three or so prototypes of like, well, which of these seems the most promising. And I mean, that as students had one goal of like entering the independent games festival like student competition and trying to win it, which is one context that I think was helpful because we had a decisive definitive or a definitive deadline that we
right,
couldn't evade, which is often very tempting. And also is like, okay, we know exactly what the audience for this game is. We know who we're making this for. It's for IGF judges who are games press, game developers, and just people who like curate and love games in general, but who've played a lot. And so we're trying to make something different from everything else that they're probably going to be playing. And so we were like looking at like, oh, okay, well, in 2009, 2010, it was 2D puzzle platformers were like the thing. And then otherwise it was like first person, also puzzle games similar to Portal, things like that. So let's not do any of that. And then let's also not do shooting. Let's not do, just like the mechanics that are most prevalent, and avoid
right.
them at all costs. Um, And then with Bugsnax, we went through a similar process on our team internally where everyone pitched and went through that same thing. But on top of that, now that we are a company and have to pay salaries and stuff, it's also like, well, how marketable do we think this is? What's in the space right now in terms of what's popular, what's done well, what hasn't done well, why? And then like what business models are currently popular and what makes sense for us in the kind of like lifestyles we want to live while we're making this. Like, we talked about, do we want this to be a live game, or not a live game, but a like early access game that we update over time? That kind of changes a lot about what kind of stories you can tell and how you can tell them, and how the game is going to be built and what the life cycle of it is. And like, there's just so many things to consider that affected what Bugsnax ended up being. And since what we are good at and what we enjoy is, single player story, weird mechanics, some sort of subversive theme, comedy, and heart, Bugsnax came from that. And there were two other prototypes that lost to Bugsnax, but we might revisit someday. But I'm honestly glad we did not do them, and we didn't do kind of the initial pitch for Bugsnax, because I've seen other games come out that were like, oh, that was straight up like one of our pitches. I'm glad we didn't do that, because now we're not competing, even in an indirect way, with that game for attention.
Right.
And so it's weird how that stuff kind of works out, and we there's a lot of kismet going on with our ideas that is both very calculated, but then also very like luck driven or privilege driven.
Right.
And it's interesting.
It's actually interesting that you bring up the notion that at one point this was you had considered the idea of an early access or a more open style, because to paraphrase something you said actually 7 years ago, you said you believed that one of the best things you should do as a developer is to show your game off early.
Early.
As soon as you've got that core locked, you should let everybody know about it, and broadcast it. And then here's Bugsnax,
Yeah.
which literally I had not heard of until July 2020.
Right, like 6 months ago or something like that.
So what changed?
Yeah, I think we realized how big of a game we were making, and how much of its value was around it being a story driven narrative game. Like, it has all these systemic elements, but a lot of what we thought people would actually grab onto were the characters and the story, and the themes. And it felt like if we showed that early, and often, it would be difficult to maintain interest, and you kind of create another job for yourselves in promoting the game and making sure that people are continuously excited. And part of what we learned with Octodad was promoting a game for like 2.5 years is very hard and draining, as you know. And uh like Hades, for example, like went that route, the like early access route, and they did a fantastic job of it. But just like, I know how much work it is to sit there and like shoot like even just be part of like a documentary and do interviews and continuously field feedback from players. And I don't know, our team size, the kind of people we are, just like none of it really meshed or made sense for what we expected from that kind of process. And so, at least for this game, it didn't make sense, for us. And I think that's, since doing a lot of those early interviews, something that I have been trying to push more and more for students, or for people who are starting studios, or for anybody really, is just like, everything is so incredibly contextual, that it's very difficult to give advice that is broad, and correct for a lot of people, because there are so many different factors in like what makes sense for the best game for you to make with your team or by yourself, at the time that you're making it, and like when you plan to release it, and like what your goals with it are. Like, are you trying to be like financially independent, or are you just making a game because you enjoy making the game? Or there's just so much to consider that it's impossible to give blanket advice and have it go well. And we got a little bit afraid because even people from DePaul University, where we all, most of us went to school, started like doing their senior projects and then immediately going to Kickstarter. And we're like, what are you doing? Like, no, that, like, first of all, Kickstarter, like the heyday of games on Kickstarter, at
Right.
least for a small game that wasn't necessarily super polished and didn't have like a huge campaign, that was 2009, 2010, maybe 2011 territory. And then, you have the market gets flooded with those things, and then no one eventually wants to write about them anymore unless they really, really stand out. And it's hard to do that. And there's just like a whole bunch of reasons why it's like, no, do not do what we did now, because we did it then and
Yeah,
things were
yeah, yeah, yeah,
different
yeah.
then. That, you know, after the fact of touting like different things that we did, I'm like, damn, I wish I had not given that advice, or I had not said that, because it, I don't know, I don't want to be like narcissistic, but it seems to have led some people astray.
Mhm.
Um, and I think just in general, the most valuable skill I feel like we have as a team is being very critical of our own decisions and movements, and very analytical about why we are making them, despite the fact that we make these like goofy, bright physics nightmare games. Like, we run our business more like a business than I think other people might believe, if that makes sense.
Look, I would say this: if you have any sense of guilt over somebody following that path, and then or following that blueprint and it not working out for them, I would throw that over the window, because it's, I mean, really, like, I mean, that's one of the things that I've always found that like education systems don't necessarily teach properly, is that like this is a history lesson. It's not
Right.
a cookie trail. You can't do the
Yeah.
same thing, right? Because I've definitely fallen into the pitfalls of being like, well, we did this 5 years ago and it worked, and like we should be able to do it again, right? But no, everything changes. We're constantly in an evolving state. But I mean, given what you said 6-7 years ago, do you still think it is good for, maybe wasn't right for you guys at the scale you are at now and at the scale of that project, but is it still good for fresh indie devs to show their game off early and make it visible to everybody all the time
I think it depends on if
in 2020?
in 2020, I think it depends on if you are trying to be completely like published, self-funded, or if you're just looking to get your studio going and the people in your studio don't have any reservations about taking money from elsewhere. Because if you can get the funding, um, then there's no need to be as visible, because you're likely going to have a budget to market the game and get people to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
But part of being small, part of being indie, whether you're a startup or somewhat established, is being flexible and agile, and being able to kind of turn on a dime when opportunities either arise or you realize something's a bad idea and you shouldn't be doing it. So it's hard to say like one direction makes sense, um, because part of why we didn't announce Bugsnax for so long is because we had been talking to PlayStation, we had been talking to Epic and different companies for a significant amount of time, like years, of like, this is what we're doing, this is what we're working on. What do you guys think? Are you excited about it? And like, until those agreements are like met and those things make sense, there was value in not announcing, because you then have the cash as an existing entity to make a big splash at a big event. But if you're a smaller studio and a smaller dev in which you don't have uh, that reputation yet, you have to build it. And so at that point, yes, maybe like a green grass uh, approach in which you are building campaigns as you go, and you're promoting every little thing and talking about all of your choices and decisions, and why all these big indies suck, and the new way you're doing it is the best, and like all of that kind of stuff makes sense. I feel like I have such a hard time saying like yes, do this, or no, do not do this now. It's scarier when you know more, and you by knowing more you feel like you know less, because you realize all the stuff you don't know. Whereas like back then, like we made decisions while they were calculated. It's like also there's like a naive, uh
You didn't even
not
know what mistakes you were making.
right. And now we're much more careful, and also like I feel like I was more nervous for Bugsnax releasing than I was for Octodad releasing, because now we have something to lose. Whereas before it was like, well, I'll just keep working this other day job that I have, and keep going that, and maybe even if I am not, super happy about it, at least I have a living, and the means to continue doing whatever. And now,
Is that thing to lose just the stability, or do you mean like the goodwill that you guys had earned, or what is that thing you could have lost?
yeah, I mean both. Like you could lose the living. Like Octodad, luckily, made enough money that we were able to make Bugsnax essentially off of all that, and we were lucky to be in that position. But we could have spent 8 years on this game, or whatever, and completely run that money out, to make it like perfect, or what we thought was perfect, and maybe that would have not made it sell any more copies, gotten us any better deals or whatever. uh, and so there's kind of like a bet hedging you have to do there, where it's like, well, this is good enough, this meets what we want this game to be, even if it's not perfect. We're grabbing hold of these opportunities that are showing themselves and meeting those deadlines, because it seems like this is what is best for this game and for us at this point in time. Even if Bugsnax could have been like a better game if we had spent more time on it, but you also like it's so complicated. Like you reach a point where maybe there's like a point of no return, where it's like, okay, well now I'm sick of this game, and even if I work on it longer, uh, are my returns on that even going to be as good as they
Right.
were when I was hyped on it? Like probably not. It's going to be worse and worse as time goes on, because no matter how much you love a thing, 5 or 6 years of it is a lot, um, especially within our like short lifespans. Uh,
Yeah,
so
you only get like 10 games tops.
right, right, and so it's just like, balancing all of those things constantly, and all of them affect one another. Uh, I don't know. It's a lot, and I feel like now, like if someone asks for advice, um, there's like almost like a screening process to some extent, of just like, how serious are they about this thing?
Right.
Like how much work have they done up until now to show that they're committed to it, or that they're really trying to like learn. Um, and then, okay, well, let's have an actual like one-on-one call and talk through like the details of what you're trying to do and why you're doing it. Because even if I don't have the solution for them, it might like reveal a path,
Mm.
of like, well, what I'm really trying to do is just get this idea across in this game. And it's like, well, maybe you don't need to make this your full-time thing.
Right.
um, if that's what your goal is, or if your goal is to like make a game to where you could start a studio, well, then maybe you need to change this and this about it to make it more attractive to a platform holder or players in general, or whatever, or at least like more friendly or whatever. And there are different amounts of concession that different people will make, depending on what their motivations are to reach those goals. And some people are unwilling to like make any change to their path. of what they want to do with the game, even if it's counterintuitive to what the result they want, um, within the realities of where like the world we live in. Um, and that I think that's sometimes the more difficult thing, where it's like a person comes to you with a question, you give them the honest answer of what you think, they don't do whatever it is you suggested, and then years later you see like, oh well, that project didn't do super well, or they lost
Right.
X, Y, and Z, and it's like, oh, it's tough. I don't know, it sucks.
If only you had listened to me. No.
Right, the perfect yeah, and that's the other thing is like, I like it when I am wrong, when it's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
no, they purposely went the opposite direction of what I told them to do, and they were successful, and it's like,
Right.
cool. I I am an idiot sometimes, and that's good. Like, I don't know. Uh
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is hard. I mean, like, especially since I've been on Twitch this past year, like the amount of people who come in asking for blanket advice is very, very difficult, especially when you can't see their project
right.
or these kinds of things. But on the topic of giving blanket advice that everybody needs to follow, I'm curious, like, what do you think? Like, when after you guys finished Octodad, you've got your first success. What were the
Mhm.
best investments you guys made in terms of ways of growing the studio and keeping yourselves stable going forward? That led you to being able to produce Bugsnax as a studio. What were the best investments after your first hit?
Making sure that we were working on a game that each person on in the studio was invested in one way or another.
Okay.
Um, Not everyone was 100% bought in just by the pitch. Sometimes it's like, well, these are the kind of skill sets that we're going to need to build this. And maybe that's a skill set like this person wants, that they're interested in their discipline, or their set of disciplines. And so they'll be able to kind of reinvest in themselves and learn something through the project, and then over time they grow to love it, even if they didn't initially think it was like the best of the pitches or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that level of like building the people within your studio in order to build the studio, um, and making sure that everyone has something to kind of hold on to through the process. um, there's a matter of actually like spending the time to understand each person's kind of um, well-being and like state of like where they are in life, what their goals are, what they want in 5-10 years, that sort of thing. And then actually talking to them about it one-on-one and having those kind of like those people skills to be able to intuit those things and incorporate them into how like you're going to work. Which, I mean, I think that kind of thing we talked about before we did Deadliest Catch, of like, what kind of company do we actually want to run? What
Mm-hmm.
kind of lifestyle do each of us want to lead? Do we want it to be like, well, making this game is the only important thing to us? Or do we want it to be like, we work 30-35 hours a week, and otherwise we have lives outside of this? And the latter is what it was for us. And that's also part of why it took 6 years, is because like we're not grinding away at
Right.
it for 80 hours a week or anything like that, and wanted to um, minimize any sort of like over 40 hours a week work anywhere possible. uh, and I'm feel like we were pretty successful with that. Like, it was only maybe the last month that we were working like over 40 hours a week, and even then it wasn't everybody, it wasn't all the time. um and I think like after making your first thing and being successful, you start having to think about those kind of like, I'm running a business, I'm taking care of people, I'm the source of their livelihood, especially if you're in a position where like you're CEO or treasurer or whatever. uh I have to make decisions that are good for everyone here, and it comes with like a lot of, I don't know, responsibility and fear and like
Right. Naturally.
worry eventually. And like uh you're in some ways you're like lucky to be in that position, but also it's just like, oh, here's this whole other set of work. Here's all these other jobs that I have just kind of taken on. Now I maybe can't spend as much time, I don't know, programming or testing the game or doing whatever, and making sure that like you have people there that actually want to do that work, as opposed to like, well, what the hell, I have to do all this like administrative paperwork now. I have to file a corporate annual report, or I have to do our taxes, or like find someone to do those things. And like even just like, I don't know, for us, it's always been about, in terms of like people growing at a manageable rate and only growing when it makes sense for what we're trying to make, instead of being like, well, let's just get as big as we can and like, you know, like a growth startup mindset. That's not it's not us at all, because it's been our experience here in Chicago and talking to developers elsewhere, where they are like, I have to move every 2 years because, you know, these jobs here have dried up, or like they will only contract us for so long or whatever. And ideally, when we hire someone, we don't want them to be in a position where it's like, well, I have a job in 6 months. We like it to
affects output quite heavily.
Yeah, because why would you put in all that effort if you're just going to be gone? Like, I don't know. We try to make it very clear, like, even if it's a contract person, like, this is how long this contract is specifically. We're not, I don't know. I feel like you just don't want to lead people on too much. Because I wouldn't want that kind of stress for myself. Why would I purposely put it, you know, onto someone else?
Right.
So there's just like a whole set of things to consider that are entirely separate from making a video game, and more about running a business and caring about the people that work with you, that you have to have.
I've talked to a lot of developers who got into you know, they're programmers or artists who got into this to make games and then found themselves running a company, which is something they never really intended to do or ever considered themselves capable of.
Right.
As I mean, your official title is president, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that for yourself?
I feel like I lucked out a little bit because I was a programmer initially, and I like went to school for computer science for that, for games specifically. But and like I was like okay at it, but I never felt like it was like my calling, or like, this is, I'm gonna get better at this for the rest of my life. And so when it came to Octodad, when it's like, oh well, we need someone to email and talk to all these people and reach out to press and uh, do this kind of like businessy stuff, I was like, well, you know, I'll do it. Somebody has to do it,
Right.
in order to make everything kind of go, and make sure that like the game is presented in the best way possible, and like the end results benefit everybody on the team and stuff like that. Because if it's left up to chance, or if it's left up to like, well, we have, I feel like there are situations in which a game does well, all the money comes in, and then there was no like planning for like, well, what do we do with that, and how does it get distributed, and like, are we going to sit on it for a long time so that we can keep being a company? Are we going to pay it all out so that everyone can pay off their debts or whatever? Like, there has to be a planning and all of that for anything else to work. Otherwise, it's all going to implode, whether you want to make a game or not. And I don't know. I feel like I fell into that role initially just because we needed it. But over time, I've grown to like it more than the game making part. Like,
That's good.
I like the game making part, and I enjoy like testing and trying to like give feedback on stuff. But I definitely feel like I have been in more of a people management business deal role for a long time now,
He's a
which is,
suit now.
I am. It's funny because at one point, I think there's like an interview, I think it might have been with like Russ Pitts or something, where I just talk about like, I grew up not wanting to be a businessman because I didn't want to like wear a suit. and like, go to an office and stuff like that as a teenager. And, you know, here I am. Um, but like being able to do it on your own terms and kind of like
Mhm.
decide what makes sense. Um, you can be professional and you can be courteous and like good at your job without being stiff and, uh, on impersonable. I don't know. Like
Right.
there's just ways of doing what I do that I like, and I'm glad that I get to make those rules rather than following someone else's. Because if I had to fit in a structure, uh, I would not try as hard, and I would just like hate every minute of it. And I don't know. It's the same thing that I did during school. Like graduated high school, 2.6 like GPA, not great, passing basically, and then like went to college and was like, oh, I'm learning how to make games, like jump up to a whole point, 3.6. And then like, oh, now I'm running my own studio instead of working for somebody else. And like, it's like, oh, I feel like we're doing great. And like, I really care about everything. And it's always been that motivating factor of like, are we doing things the way that I think we should be doing them? Or am I being forced to follow someone else's path that I think is moronic or
Right.
like hurting people or whatever?
I'm really glad to hear though that like the that Octodad provided you with the opportunity to explore management in a fashion where you had the opportunity to explore it ethically. You had the opportunity to do it the way you wanted to, rather than like just hitting that level of success where it's like, okay, we can go forward but we have to do it this way, and nobody gets security and these kinds of things. I'm very, very glad that that happened for you guys.
I feel like we pulled a lot from. Uh, I feel like outside of paying attention to the context of things in terms of blanket advice and the history of things, like you mentioned,
Right.
we had a lot of mentorship from other developers who had run studios or started studios over time. Um, and, like Gaijin Games, who are choice provisions now with the Bit Trip series, like our first GDC when we had Octodad in IGF, like they invited us to a party they threw and were like really kind and like answered all our questions. And like then we had our professors at DePaul, Patrick Curry and Scott Roberts, and Patrick had worked at Midway. And so we got like all of that like history and backstory and experience. And it's just over time, um, being very willing to ask questions when we know we are wrong, or even if we don't think we are wrong, assuming we are wrong on purpose. That kind
Right.
of like Midwest humbleness has gone a long way for us, I think.
That's good. um I want to snap back to Bugsnax for a minute here, and specifically in terms of building that announcement. Because this is something that you took on a very active role in as
Mhm.
president. What was that period like for you leading up to the announcement, and um, what was the catharsis or panic like after?
I mean, we kind of knew from maybe 2017 or 2018 that we were going to need help. So 2 years beforehand, we were like, we're going to need help announcing this because we're going to be so busy trying to just make and finish the game that it's unlikely because that we're going to be able to like promote it on our own and do all of that like work. Um, because like there's all this invisible work that I feel like players and oftentimes new developers don't know about, or even if you're like a developer at a larger studio where you have a very like specific role, um, where it's like you have to make trailers, you have to make press releases, you have to write all of those, make the assets for all of those things, do all the iteration on them to get them to a place that you like, and that takes a lot of time and effort.
Yeah.
And to have essentially the whole dev team stop working on the game to do the promotional materials is huge because you can lose weeks and
Hmm.
months. uh, and so we were looking into like a PR firm or a marketing agency and things like that, and we ended up running into Pop Agenda with like Jen and MC and Nick. And they seemed like a kind of like one-stop shop in terms of like PR marketing, production help, all that kind of stuff. And I feel like that was one of the big things that led to the success of Bugsnax was realizing like we cannot do all of this by ourselves anymore. We barely pulled it off with Octodad, which was a much smaller, more simple game and a simpler concept to kind of like get across, or at least I feel like we hit a stride early on of like how to pitch the game to people.
Right.
Whereas with Bugsnax, it was like this is very complicated, and I don't exactly know what the right way is to present this to people for them to understand what it is, or even get them like in the door to want to know more. And so working with Pop Agenda was huge for us because having that kind of outside perspective on something that we had otherwise been zoned in on for what 4.5 or so years at that point was huge because they could say, you know, this is how we think players will perceive this and what they'll think of it on first glance because they were essentially as new to it as the people that we would at the time that we would present it to. Um, and then, you know, on top of that, them being able to do all the legwork of all the actual work of
Right.
putting all that stuff together and having the experience and the press contacts and stuff. And while we had, excuse me, something interesting I think is like we had a huge press list when it came to like releasing Octodad, and I feel like we did a pretty good job promoting it. But people, I don't know, it's weird because our jobs have not changed essentially for like
Yeah.
10 years. But other people's jobs change all the time.
Yep.
They move from different outlets. They maybe they leave games writing altogether or whatever and like go be a developer.
Mm-hmm.
And like keeping track of what everyone is actually up to, what they care about, what kind of games they're playing and covering is a lot of work. And so we needed somebody who was actively doing that all the time, which we were not
Yeah.
anymore. And so it's like I'd be like, oh, we should totally talk to this person. They're gonna love Bugsnax. Then you go and look up, and it's like, oh, they're doing something entirely different now. Um,
Right.
so yeah, I just think that was huge in leading up to the announcement, and in finding the kind of tone of that announcement, what we should show off, what we should leave out, and leave for people to wonder about because the game, to some degree, is a mystery game
Mm-hmm.
where you're trying to solve like what happened to Elizabeth Megafig and what are Bugsnax, and uh, positioning those things correctly to where players would ask the questions that we wanted them to ask and hang on to the things that we think are interesting, and then also be able to like react. Sometimes when you announce something, people get excited about something that you did not expect them to be as excited about, or they get more excited about one thing than another,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes a lot of like perspective and time and analysis to like hone in on those things and be like, okay, well now we have to adjust our entire marketing plan because these are actually the things that people care about,
Right. Or worse,
rather
let's
than
adjust our development.
right, which we've done like with Octodad, we've done, and with Bugsnax less so. That was an interesting change from Octodad to Bugsnax. Of the nice thing about announcing early and showing the game often was that you get that feedback and you can kind of adjust how the game is actually made to fit what people enjoy and want
Right.
when they play it. But with Bugsnax, both in terms of announcing it so late into its development and then also being in the middle of a pandemic
Right.
while we announced it, it's like, well, we can't take it to any shows, so we don't get that feedback. And also, we've only got like 6 months until we need to release this thing because we've announced with PlayStation for PlayStation 5. And so we can't make that many changes really. So it's been interesting. And that was I think part of the fear of releasing this game was just like, well, we don't know if anyone's gonna like this. And we like, I mean, I feel like sometimes I sell us short. Like
Yeah.
we tested the game a lot with our friends of friends, people we trust, uh, people we know will tell us if it's shit, uh, and stuff like that, to get where we're at. And you know, I think the difference between a playtester playing Octodad and a playtester playing this is with Octodad they would laugh and be more outward and obvious about how they were feeling about it, but they would only play for maybe 30 minutes
Right.
45 minutes. With this, sometimes people were silent, but they played for like 4 hours, which was very different for us experience wise of watching them play. And so we knew we had something because people played for a long time unprompted without us saying, like, you need to keep playing. Very few people were like, I don't want to do this anymore, which we did get with Octodad sometimes.
Right.
Um, and so I don't know, it's a very different experience. I'm kind of going all over the place, but there's so much
No, it makes
to talk about.
sense. No, it makes sense, the nature of like Octodad is a mechanics oriented game,
Yeah.
versus Bugsnax that I think is an immersion oriented game, right? Like when I play Octodad, when I play Octodad or games like Octodad, it's very much I go into it looking to figure out, okay, what's the cool mechanic? Okay, I
Yeah.
get it, and then my brain's like, okay, let's move on to another one.
Right.
Whereas Bugsnax, it's like it didn't really like. There are definitely interesting mechanics, but I wouldn't say anything is like breaking the mold in spectacular new ways, but it allows me to
Gameplay.
just like stay, yes, in gameplay wise, the
Yeah.
narratively I don't think anybody's done that before. But it definitely has that immersion factor. But
Right.
what's most interesting in terms of the marketing and announcement of both games is I don't think that the marketing or the announcements communicate either the like complexity of Octodad mechanic or
Sure.
the depth of the immersion and narrative in Bugsnax. And you kind of, for lack of a better term, land on this like mimetic, like catchy song on both
Yeah.
games, cool visuals thing. And I'm curious how you guys navigate um, breaking through that meme expectation, and like there people come to the game with this preconception based off of gifs or memes or just the trailer or that announcement, to actually understanding what they're getting on that package, because I've had a similar problem this year.
I think it's partially knowing that you only have a person's attention for, maybe 15, 20 seconds at the most to like grab them and make them watch the rest of a trailer,
Mm.
and knowing what within your game um, will get them and want them to watch the rest of that and like know more. Uh, and that's not always the thing that you think is the most interesting about your game. And there's like a desire to want to show off the thing that you love the most about it and you think people are going to really enjoy. But if you don't get them there, and if that thing is like too hard to describe or show within that small amount of time, then they may never get there at all.
Right.
And they may just like completely pass on what you're making, thinking like, well, this isn't for me. And I feel like being kind of a little bit flashy, but then also making people go, what the fuck, when they've watched something within the first 5 or 10 seconds is important, because at the very least, even if they don't end up liking it, they'll want to know more. And I feel like you mentioned it, we've kind of flipped from between Octodad and Bugsnax, where Octodad had the very uh, people knew it was like a physics toy in which the whole point was like you are battling the controls. But until maybe 2 weeks before release, I don't think people realized how much of a story there was there and
Right.
how much like we'd put into that narrative. And then with Bugsnax, it feels like we focused on the themes and the kind of concept a lot, but we did not say very much at all about like how this game plays initially,
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't think if we sat there and showed 45 seconds of you running around with traps capturing Bugsnax, I don't think that was going to grab people and make them want to know more.
Right.
Like in this narrative focused game, what people want is like, is there a mystery? What are the weird characters, and what is like the main, I don't know, conceit, or like the main hook of that world? Like, why should I care about this place and want to be there? And that's you eat Bugsnax, they transform your body. it's weird. Characters don't really act like it's a big deal, but obviously it's a big deal. In the same way that like Octodad is an octopus pretending to be the father of human family, but no one in the trailers or in his world point out or care that he's an octopus because they think he's a normal human father. There's just like a level of absurdity that we accept and are serious about in the same way that something like Animaniacs or Ren and Stimpy of they know what they are and they go with it and they make no concessions and they don't over explain,
Right.
which I think is important. But I don't know. I feel like I guess the answer is just it's complicated. It depends on the game. It depends on what you think is important versus what the audience or the players, potential players, might think is important, and trying to kind of gauge that. Also based around like getting in the nitty gritty of like what other games are going to be announced when you're announcing and what's been announced
Right.
recently. What are these trailers like? Are they have we moved into the movie territory where there's like a 6 second mini trailer of the trailer before the trailer? Like, are we going to do that? Are we going to try that? Does that make sense? I don't know. There's just so much, and then like all the stuff that we have drawn inspiration from and enjoyed often had a catchy theme song at the beginning because it's like a cartoon Saturday morning show sort of thing. And it worked so well for Octodad that we were like, well, we have to have a theme song, like, obviously. But at the same time, we think of Octodad as more of a TV show and Bugsnax as more of a movie in kind of like how they're structured, what a person who likes it might enjoy in terms of length of like the media they're interfacing with goes and stuff like that. It's I don't know. It's
Do you think that like players who get hooked off of that initial announcement or the initial trailer are likely to well, I mean, see, but then there you have it. You have an interesting case with Bugsnax because you guys had the PS Plus thing,
yeah.
right? Where like the question I was going to ask is, do you think players are likely to do enough research to get an idea of what the game is before they go into purchase? But I guess with the PS Plus advantage is that like they can go from right off that hook and mystery to enjoying the game, and they don't have to do that legwork. It's a very,
Right.
very
They don't have to worry about it. I mean, and that gets into like the business side of things of like what are our goals with the game? And our goals generally are like, well, we'd like to continue to make weird stuff that
mhm,
um amuses us and we think other people will like, and like bring some sort of like joy into the world, but also asks questions that makes people who are willing to engage with it on that level think about things a little bit deeper and care about the characters and the worlds we create. Um, and as long as we're able to do that, then does it really matter if our game is free or not, or
right,
whatever? Like if you make the right deals, you can often, if you've previously had a successful game and you have a track record, there's so like, that's the thing with this
if you have
advice
made
is like,
Bugsnax,
right. There's so many decisions and so many situations that ended one way and not another that led up to the fact that we were able to make those sorts of things happen for us. Um, but it just made sense where it was like, well, if we do this, we can make another thing and do it in a way that is comfortable and in a way that like everybody on the team gets to live a life that they enjoy, rather than a death march or a crunch filled nightmare where they have no control over what they're doing,
mhm.
or the choices that are being kind of made for them. So it kind of all every decision kind of leads back to that of like how happy are the people working for us, and like are we being respectful of what they want to do in their life, um and
Yeah.
trying to only bring people on when we can continue to do that.
I'm only now starting to see the incredible advantage it has been for you guys to have that sort of bigger vision that takes in all of the pieces, because it affects the way that you can announce the game,
Right.
and which leads into how you can release the game, and it, rather than just being like, okay, we're focusing on making the game, and then now we've got to just solve these problems.
Yeah,
um,
I mean, and a lot of times that stuff feels like bullshit. Like when you're first writing it down, like
mhm.
a mission statement and stuff like that. It's like this feels so corny and like goofy. But it like when you're going back to make big decisions, you're like, is it hitting these things that we said we set out to do? Um, and if it's not, is that because what we've set out to do has changed? And so we should actually like codify that and like make it official that like those things have changed so that people who work here know this is what we're trying to do. um and that, yeah, that affects everything.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a good model to follow. Thinking about
I
things before you do them. Go figure.
I don't know, it's interesting. Like I've been to GDC plenty of times and whatever, and I've been in like conversations where people are talking about how they run their businesses and stuff, and I said that kind of out loud, like, well, we probably won't hire someone unless we have a year or a couple of years of like salary worth of money for them, because I
Mhm.
don't want them to be in a situation in which they're wondering how long they're going to be here and stuff like that. And people were like, oh, well, if you have the ability to do that, fine,
Right.
cool, whatever. But it's just like, I don't know, man, it's worked for us. Like, I don't know how you do things. That's cool. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a reason why we're a very small company.
Right.
It's
Well,
literally
there's
me
a
and
reason why we're
Jake.
not 30 people or.
Right. I know. Man, it's been man, I have a million questions about like what the hell's going on, like in terms of like actual like Bugsnax lore questions, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to burden you with those tonight.
Yeah, maybe
Um,
you should have Kevin Zune or somebody else on to talk about that
would
stuff,
love
because
to.
they're deep in the Bugsnax lore.
Oh man.
So
Yes. But man, what a great game. We had so much fun playing it this week. Is there anything, I mean, as we wind down, is there anything you want to tell everybody about the game? Other than, I mean, tell them to go get it. But whatever you want to, it's,
yeah, I mean, if you buy the game on PlayStation 4, you'll get the upgrade to the PlayStation 5 version for free. If you have a PlayStation 5 and you have PlayStation Plus, you can get it for free through PlayStation Plus, I think until like January 5th. Otherwise, if you have PC, you can buy it on that big game store. Um, what else? You can follow us on Twitter at Young Horses. Um, and I guess I just hope everybody enjoys our another one of our weird games that uh, are deeper than you would initially expect, I think.
yeah, absolutely. And do yourself a favor and take the time to do a lot of the side missions. They are, uh, uh, I don't want to say the best part of the game, but quite possibly.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
one thing I actually kind of wonder if we should have been like, oh, you have to do these,
I mean, those boss
because
fights
yeah,
are,
there's some interesting stuff in there that um, is unfortunate if anybody misses. But that's always like the kind of gamble you make when
yeah.
you make a side quest or a mission or whatever.
My entire design philosophy is always in that I have never escaped it. But I mean, not to detract too much, like it is a game about collectibles in a
Yeah,
sense. It kind of like I automatically entered it with that, like I'm gonna do everything in the game because that's the kind of game it is. So I felt
sure.
pushed into that doing everything anyway.
I mean, when you know how many of something there are,
Yeah.
you just generally want them. Like that is how we have been programmed.
Yeah.
So
Again, anyway, fantastic game. It's been fantastic catching up and talking
yeah,
industry and business and game dev and on all the wonderful things and growth. And I'm so happy you guys are doing well. And yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on, Phil.
thank you for having me. Yeah, I feel a little bit bad that we didn't talk about the game more because I went on about
It's
business stuff.
to just play the game, guys. So we don't, you don't, all your questions will be
Yeah,
answered. Um,
exactly.
All right, guys, I'm going to throw you on the thanks for watching and send you off on a raid. I don't know if I'll be on tomorrow. I am working on a super secret project for the holiday pack. And so I got to work off stream, but I will see you guys. And they're all saying thank you in the
Oh
chat.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll see you guys later. Bye.